I think I have the first 7 verses. Oop, I hadn't advanced the slide. On the board. I really want to concentrate to begin with on the first 5 verses of this chapter. The whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make oven-fired bricks." They used brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth." All right. There's a couple of things I want to notice about that. Come, let us make. Come, let us make for ourselves. Let us build ourselves a city. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. It says the Lord came down in verse 5 to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And so what runs through this is something that underscores the ability of human ingenuity. They found a place that they liked, and they said, "Hey, let us make a city," but apparently there wasn't any stones around. So how do you build a walled city and buildings and all the things you need without stones? Well, they realized that you could take the clay from the earth and you could fire that clay and make it hard like a rock and glue it together with bitumen or asphalt, depending on which translation you're reading, what substances, but glue those bricks together that they made and that they determined, and they could build a city, and a great one at that. One that reached to the heavens. Now again, don't think that this is talking about literally building a tower that goes all the way to the place where God resides. That's not the point. The point is building a city that is great and that is massive and that can be seen and that can function to provide everything that everyone needs so that they need not be dispersed on the earth, but they can all stay together and have everything they needed right there. And it would be permanent. They didn't say, "Come, let us make some tents." They said, "Let us fire some bricks and make a permanent place for us to stay so we never have to leave here." And verse 5 says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. So not only did they envision this idea, what did they do? They did it. They had the ingenuity to figure out what they wanted to do and what they needed to do to accomplish their purposes and how to do it and how to make it work. And then they went about doing it and were successful in building this great city that, as it says here, reached to the heavens. Now remember that phrase because we're going to see it again later. Okay? Hopefully I'll remember to highlight it when we get to it because probably won't be later tonight. It'll probably be next week or the week after. But anyway, they made this. Human ingenuity is amazing. We're successful. We can do a lot of amazing things. There's a couple of people in the room that's old enough to remember a leader of this nation who decided one day that, you know what, in the next 10 years, we want to put somebody on the moon. And we went to work. And guess what happened 9 years later? There was an American walking on the moon. That's what man can accomplish. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Do you remember the Well, you may not. You remember from your history classes the smallpox epidemic? Reading about that? It's killing so many people. And there's a doctor, and he notices that these milkmaids, that they don't seem to be getting smallpox and dying like everybody else. So he scratches his head and he starts going, well, what's up with that? And he starts investigating and looking at them, and he finds out that they have a disease called cowpox that they get from milking the cows, but it seems like that's a similar disease, only it's not deadly to humans, to the smallpox. And he says, well, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe because they've been exposed to cowpox, they have immunity from smallpox. He said, let me test this theory. And so he collects some of the pus out of the cowpox pustules on these people and scratches into the arm of other people who haven't had smallpox yet. Lo and behold, they get cowpox, and then it goes away, and they don't get smallpox. And so the concept of inoculation or a vaccination is born. The idea that, wait a minute, you know what, we can take this thing that's not deadly and expose people to it, and that'll build their immune system so that the thing that is deadly doesn't have the effect on them that it has on other people. We figured that out. You know, we didn't, but humans did. It's pretty amazing what we can do. Let us make for ourselves, build for ourselves. Oh, wait a minute, we don't have stone. No big deal. Let's look around and see what's available and what we can do. You know what we can do? We can fire bricks. And we can make our own stone to build this city with. And they did. And it worked. Only what's the problem with all of this? How are they solving all of these problems? That's exactly right. They did not love the Lord their God with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their mind. That was not first and foremost with them. Who did they worship? What we can do. Look at what we don't need God. Look at what we can do. By the way, if you go all the way back to the garden, do you remember the last thing the devil said to Eve, the one that actually pushed her over the edge and she ate the fruit? God doesn't want you to have this because he knows that the day you eat of it, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. In other words, the suggestion is, if you eat this fruit, then you won't need God anymore. You'll be like God yourself. You'll know good and evil. You won't have to rely upon him to tell you any of these things. You'll have all the knowledge that he has. Of course, that wasn't true. It was a lie, but that's beside the point. That's the thing that pushed her over the edge. That's the thing that made her say, look, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because why? Because of that independent streak that runs through us that says we want to be able to do and solve and build for ourselves. We want to be able to address our problems and overcome all the... Man's been doing that ever since the beginning. There was a terrible worldwide war in the early part of the 20th century. We call it World War I. They just called it the Great War at the time. And they were so horrified by war. They all turned to God. They went back to church. They began to worship. They began to love their neighbors as themselves. And war went away. That's how the problem was solved, right? No, you know what happened? Man got together and said, hey, you know what? We need to build a League of Nations where the leaders from all of the nations can get together and we can solve all these problems before and without war. In other words, we're going to solve our big problem ourselves. Let us make for ourselves an authority that covers even the nations to keep the nations from getting in squabbles. And we have its predecessor to this day, the UN. We're always building things trying to solve our problems, right? And we believe that we can solve all of our own problems. The problem is, we can't. There is a way which seems right to man, but its end is destruction. Yep. Right. And by the way, he had to confuse their language because, well, let's just read those two verses and then we'll just move right into that discussion because that is part of what I want to talk about. The Lord God said, behold, they're one people. They all have one language. This is only the beginning of what they will do. As great as this city was, God said it's only the beginning of what they're going to do. There's greater things in store. Nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Now, if that is the way that it is, then are they ever going to turn to God to seek God's solution? No. They're going to build their city. There is a competing city that we're going to talk about. A city that God has in mind, a city that God plans to build, that God plans to use to unite people and bring people together. And so this is a competing city with his city. That's really what's going on here. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord God dispersed them from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. So God put a stop to it. And this is a pattern that you're going to notice throughout the entire Bible. Men build. They build what they want. They build what they like. God looks at it, is not happy because they're not in fellowship with him, and so he does what? He puts a stop to it. He comes in and intervenes. He had done that in Noah's day as well, right? He looked upon the earth. He was not pleased with what he saw. He said, I won't strive with man forever, 120 years. This is all coming to an end, and that's what he did. Now, a relatively short time later, a few generations later, here in the valley of Shinar, the same thing happening. People once again begin to build for themselves and make what they want, and God says, no. Now, just turn one. You may not even have to turn. Actually, shouldn't have to turn the page. It's actually the latter half of this same chapter. Go down to verse 27. We're talking about somebody else in a whole other situation here. We're talking about Terah and his son. Anybody know who the son of Terah was? Abraham. Abram is what he's called at this point. God hadn't changed his name yet. Down in verse 27, let's read together. These are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in the Ur of the Chaldeans. So we know where they're from. They're from the city of Ur. All right? Notice this is another great city where people are populated, where people are congregating, where people are living together. Most historians believe that this was a major society. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child, and Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai the daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So they leave this city, and they get as far as another city called Haran. And look at chapter 12. This is one of those places where the chapter division may make someone believe that there is a change of discussion, but there's really not. When the father dies, the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and from your kindred and from your father's house and from to the land that I will show you." So they had left and gone somewhere, but they went to the land that they chose, right? Now God says to Abraham, you're going to go to a place, this needs to be a place that I show you. You go where I tell you to go. And I will make of you a great nation. Notice he doesn't say, I want you to make yourself into a great nation. He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Now you remember what happened in the first part of this chapter? Come, let us build for ourselves a city and make a name for ourselves. Now God says to Abraham, no, you go, and I'm going to tell you to the land that you're going to go to, and I'm going to make a great nation of you, and I'm going to make your name great. Here's the contrast. God is saying, I will do this, rather than man saying, let us do this for ourselves. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. Notice again, he doesn't tell you, you need to bless the people who bless you and curse the people who don't. No, he said, I'll do that. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. God is going to build a kingdom. God is going to make a nation. God is going to build a city. God is going to make a name for these people, and God is going to bless the world through this. I will show, I will make, I will bless. God said, that's the contrast. Come let us, as opposed to I will do, coming from God. Our building versus God's building. Now there's a whole lot of stuff that I'm going to skip that we could talk about in connection with this. We just don't have time. Go to the book of Daniel. Let's look in the second chapter of the book of Daniel. Second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. And the king commanded that the magicians and enchanters and sorcerers and Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. Now this story is actually, there's two layers to this story that are both underscoring the same thing. Here's the dream. He turns first to his magicians, to the men, to the wise men around him for their interpretation and their direction and their advice on what to do. What we're going to find out is that the person who has the answers is who? Not these magicians. He turns to Daniel eventually, and Daniel tells him point blank, I'm not giving you this information. I'm just going to do what? I'm going to deliver the answer from the Lord. So there's that contrast. What we know, what we do, how we solve problems as opposed to God and what He does and how He solves problems. King said to them, I had a dream. My spirit is troubled to know the dream. The Chaldean said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants a dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you're trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times have changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. You tell me what I dreamed. And they said, there's not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. No great and powerful king has asked such thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Of course, this made the king angry. Look down, starting in verse 20 with me. He turns to Daniel around verse 17. And in verse 20 it says, Daniel answered and said, well, first off, let's go to 19. The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night, and Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So God provided Daniel with the information. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. You notice where wisdom and might belong. They belong with God, not with man. The wise men of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom couldn't answer the problem. But God can. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells within him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and now have made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Daniel, to begin with, recognizes that his knowledge comes from where? From God. That God holds wisdom, that God holds the answers, that God has the power. So Daniel goes in and he begins to talk to the king, and he tells the king the vision. He interprets the vision for him. Look at 44 and 45. The process of interpreting the vision. We get to the end of it. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. That's what man was trying to do, build a great city that would stand forever. God says all your cities and all your kingdoms are going to fail, but the one that I build, it will stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. What did God reveal? You don't need to build for yourselves a city. You don't need to build for yourselves a kingdom. You don't need to build for yourselves anything. I am building. It's going to come down from me. It's not going to have any human hands working on it. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke to pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king. The kingdom that God has in store, the kingdom that God's going to provide, is built by Him. That's in contrast to all these other things. By the way, don't forget the Abraham story. We're not going to get to it tonight because the clock is not being my friend. But the Abraham story is going to come back. Him being out there looking for this place that God said, I'm going to tell you where to go, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make a nation for you. We're going to find out what Abraham was being told about a little bit later. Chapter 4, we have another dream. This one's about a tree that's going to be chopped down. All the branches are going to be lopped off. The leaves are going to be stripped off. The fruit's going to be scattered. This is going to be a great tree, very fruitful. Listen to what it says in verse 22 of Daniel 4. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven. Does that sound familiar to anybody, that phrase, reaches to heaven? Come, let us make for ourselves a city. Let us build a tower that reaches to the heaven. Nebuchadnezzar is being told by God, you have grown strong. Your greatness has reached to heaven. Your dominion to the ends of the earth. Because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, the tender grass of the field. He goes on. This is the one that was the dream leading up to what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Well, he lost his place as the king, and he ended up wandering in the wilderness like a wild animal until he was humbled, and then he was restored. That's the reason why the stump was left. But understand that this language of this dominion or power or authority that reaches to the heaven, that is about the glory that men seek. We all build nations and we want them to be the greatest nation in the world. Everyone wants that. The Greeks wanted that. The Romans wanted that. England wanted that. The United States desires that. Russia desires that for themselves. Everybody wants to be the great king. Nebuchadnezzar got there. His glory reached to the heavens. He was known from end to end on the earth. His dominion stretched over the whole earth. And God says, I'm going to cut you down. Do you notice he's doing the exact same thing to Nebuchadnezzar that he did in Babel? He wasn't pleased with what was going on, and he said, what? I'm going to get involved. I'm going to put a stop to this. We got to stop there. Time requires us to. There's so much more to talk about. But this is the constant struggle that goes on, and it goes on at every level of our existence. Our individual life building. I want to do this. Remember James talked about that? If I say I'm going to go to such and such a city, and I'm going to go to work there, and I'm going to make a profit, he said, oh, don't say that. Say what? If the Lord wills, you'll do this or that. We do it on an individual level. We do it in our homes. We do it in local churches. We do it in cities. We do it in states. We do it in nations. We try to build for ourselves, and we ought to be doing what? Letting God build for us these things. Got to stop. Thanks for your presence and participation.